Imagine waking up one day in a house that is immaculate, where every dish is clean, the air smells like lavender and ambition, and a checklist on your fridge has every box ticked. Your calendar is full of goals met, relationships maintained, bills paid early, meals prepped, and 8 hours of sleep achieved each night. You have made it. This is what you were told life would feel like when you finally had it all together. But then, something strange happens. You sit down with your coffee and stare into nothing. There is no crisis, no chaos, no deadline screaming for attention. Just a clean, quiet room and the dull throb of a question you cannot shake. Why doesn't this feel like peace? You've done everything right. You've read the books, followed the routines, color-coded your productivity, curated your circle, healed your childhood wounds, attended therapy, drank green smoothies, and posted gratitude lists. You have by all outward metrics achieved personal success, and yet there's a hollowness that creeps in during the pauses, a kind of existential vertigo, a subtle panic wrapped in calmness, like a well-decorated room with no door out. What if this version of having it all together isn't real? What if it's a performance stitched together by fear and comparison? What if the ideal of stability we chase is just another way to avoid looking at what we truly feel? You don't fall apart because your life is in shambles. You fall apart precisely when you realize you've followed all the rules, and you're still lost. Here's the paradox. We long to feel whole, so we try to organize life until it no longer threatens us. But the moment we've crafted perfection, we discover a deeper discomfort. Wholeness doesn't come from control. It comes from authenticity, and authenticity is messy. So who created this myth of having it all together? And why do so? Many people believe that the pinnacle of a good life is one where nothing is ever out of place, no emotion unregulated, no need unmet, no flaw unfiltered. Why are we so desperate to be seen as composed, capable, and self-contained, even when it costs us intimacy, spontaneity, and joy? Consider this. When was the last time you told someone you were not okay without immediately qualifying it? When was the last time you let yourself be loved in your vulnerability, not in spite of it? What if the idea of a perfect life is not a goal, but a prison? What if holding it all together is not a sign of strength, but a fear of unraveling? And what if the unraveling is exactly where the real life begins? Because no one ever tells you this, but the people who seem like they have it all together are often the ones silently falling apart behind locked doors. They are suffocating under the weight of the image they've built, and they don't know how to ask for help because they are too afraid of ruining the illusion. And maybe you're one of them. Maybe you've smiled through days that felt like slow drownings. Maybe you've gotten so good at appearing fine that even you no longer know how to tell when you're not. But here's a dangerous and beautiful truth. You don't have to earn your right to fall apart. You don't need permission to be undone. You don't need a reason to be human. And you certainly don't need to pretend your wounds have healed just because everyone expects you to be okay by now. This myth, this shiny, filtered, airbrushed ideal of having it all together is not real. It's a survival mechanism, a defense against the terrifying truth that life is unpredictable. Emotions are unruly, and meaning cannot be spreadsheet-ed. But if you're willing to look beyond the myth, if you're willing to explore the discomfort beneath the polish, you may find something far more honest, far more human, far more alive. So let's go deeper. Let's ask the question most are too afraid to whisper. Who taught you that being whole means never being broken? And what would happen if you stopped chasing the version of you who's always okay and started listening to the one who isn't? Because that version, the messy one, the scared one, the raw and real one, she's not your weakness. She might be the only part of you that's still truly alive. The myth of having it altogether is not born out of innocence. It is a carefully constructed ideal shaped by centuries of cultural programming, societal conditioning, and psychological defense. It thrives on silence, shame, and the desperate human need to belong. But where did it begin? It began with fear. In ancient times, to be visibly unstable, emotional, or erratic was not just a personal flaw, it was a threat to your tribe. Vulnerability was dangerous. Dependence could get you left behind. So we evolved to mask weakness, to present control, to fake composure as a survival strategy. Even as we grew more civilized, the instinct stayed now. Instead of tigers and famines, we fear rejection, judgment, and in response, we've developed a new armor, the curated self. Carl Jung would call this the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society, to appear acceptable and consistent with collective values. But the deeper truth, he said, is buried in the shadow, the disowned parts of ourselves. We hide because we believe they will make us unlovable. The desire to appear put together is the persona in hyperdrive. It's a self-branding project, a performance designed not to be, but to appear. And slowly, we forget the difference. We begin to believe the mask is us, but there's a cost. Because while your curated self might win you applause, it robs you of connection. No one can love the real you because no one ever sees her. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this when he wrote, "Every profound spirit needs a mask." He didn't mean that masks are inherently false. He meant they are often necessary but dangerous when we forget they're not our face. And here is the tragedy. We now live in a time where being vulnerable feels riskier than being fake. We post our happiness but not our heartbreak. We share success but hide struggle. We pretend to have answers, even when we're drowning in doubt, because to be seen as confused, flawed, or uncertain is to lose credibility. We live in a world where perfection is rewarded and authenticity is punished, so we conform. We tighten our emotional boundaries. We wear confidence like a costume. We become experts in appearing okay, and slowly the myth takes root. It whispers, if you feel lost, you're failing. If you don't know what you're doing, hide it. If you break down, do it in private. If you fall apart, you've become weak. But this is not strength. This is self-abandonment. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once said that man's deepest desire is not pleasure, but meaning. And meaning cannot be found in hollow perfection. It is only discovered through suffering, searching, and the honest confrontation of what we are. We are not tidy beings. We are contradictory, ever-changing, wounded, evolving. But the myth of having it all together teaches us to reject this truth. It tells us that the goal is to be resolved, healed, certain, and done. But what if you're never done? What if growth is not a straight line, but a spiral? What if the constant becoming, the oscillation between order and chaos is not failure, but the most honest version of progress? Jean-Paul Sartre believed that freedom is a burden. He said we are condemned to be free, to face our choices, our uncertainty, our inability to escape responsibility for the shape of our lives. So we trade that freedom for scripts. We cling to blueprints handed to us by others, how to live, how to succeed, how to finally feel okay. But these scripts are Cages dressed as comfort. They don't tell you how to live. They tell you how to conform to the image, to the brand, to the version of you that is always calm, successful, and emotionally regulated. And the worst part, we pass this myth down to others, unconsciously. Children learn early, don't cry in public, don't show fear, don't break down, don't admit you don't know. We condition each other into emotional isolation. We make togetherness a benchmark for worth, and we begin to associate authenticity with danger. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote that the human will is driven by endless striving, that satisfaction is fleeting, and suffering is the norm. But perhaps the greatest suffering comes not from what happens to us but from the parts of ourselves we silence in order to look acceptable. We live double lives. One is visible, neat, rehearsed, celebrated. The other is hidden, chaotic, unspoken, lonely. But the truth is always buried in the hidden one. Because real connection happens in the mess. Real transformation begins in the breaking. And real peace is not the absence of struggle, it is the radical acceptance of it. So if you've felt like a fraud for not having it all together, if you've wondered why your life feels performative, even when it looks perfect, you are not broken. You are waking up. You are beginning to see that the myth was never meant to liberate you. It was meant to control you by making you fear your own humanity. But once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So the question becomes, what are the hidden consequences of chasing this illusion? And what has it cost you? Because what comes next is not about theory. It's about everything you've lost by pretending to be okay. Imagine a woman who smiles at the office, nods at meetings, and says, "I'm good, just busy." Her desk is neat, her deadlines met. People admire her, they call her strong. But every night, she stares at the ceiling for hours, wondering why her chest feels like a vice. She doesn't cry not because she doesn't want to, but because she no longer remembers how that woman might be you, or the person you love, or the one sitting across from you on the train. That's what makes this myth so dangerous. It hides in plain sight, on the surface. The pursuit of having it all together looks like ambition, responsibility, discipline. But underneath, it becomes something much darker: emotional suppression, disconnection, and chronic self-betrayal. You begin to lose the ability to locate your real self beneath the mask. The smiling face becomes muscle memory. The phrase "I'm fine" becomes a reflex. And your inner life, your fears, doubts, longings, goes unheard. This fragmentation of self has a cost. And it's not just emotional. Neuroscience tells us that when we consistently suppress our emotions, the brain doesn't simply forget them. They get stored sidly in the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain. Over time, this leads to chronic stress responses, fatigue, insomnia, brain fog, immune dysfunction. We think we're holding it together, but in truth, the body is holding everything we refuse to feel. And what begins as emotional control soon becomes emotional paralysis. You start to fear your own feelings. You fear sadness because it threatens your image of strength. You fear anger because it contradicts your calm persona. You fear anxiety because it exposes your uncertainty. So you smile wider, work harder, numb deeper. But the more you suppress, the more you disconnect not just from your emotions, but from your intuition, your creativity, your sense of meaning. You begin to forget what you actually want. This is the erosion of self that no one talks about. Because from the outside, your life looks together, but inside, you feel like a ghost. Now, zoom out. What happens when entire societies operate this way? You get cultures of perfectionism, toxic positivity, chronic productivity, and spiritual bypassing. You get the rise of self-help that teaches you to optimize, not feel. You get therapy language hijacked by influencers who sell healing as a lifestyle aesthetic. You get a world where everyone is talking about growth, but no one is allowed to be in pain. We've created environments where burnout is glamorized, and breakdowns are only acceptable if they're followed by a globe montage. This has consequences. It creates friendship circles where no one talks about what's really going on. It fosters workplaces where vulnerability is seen as weakness. It breeds relationships where authenticity is traded for compatibility. You stay in jobs that suffocate you because at least it looks successful. You stay in marriages that are empty. Because at least it looks stable. You stay in identities that no longer fit because at least they make sense to others. In truth, this isn't a life, it's a performance. And slowly, that performance becomes a prison. Here's where the psychological trap deepens. The more you play the role of the together person, the more people treat you accordingly. They come to you for advice, not support. They see you as the one who never breaks. And over time, they stop checking in, because you seem fine. And now you're isolated, not because others don't care, but because you've become unrecognizable in your own vulnerability. So when the day comes, and it always comes, when something cracks inside you, and you need help, you don't know how to ask, because you were never given permission to be seen in your unraveling. And if you do, finally, admit you're struggling, people don't know what to do with it, because the myth is so powerful, so pervasive, that even our loved ones have bought into it. You say, I don't think I'm okay. And they say, but you're always so strong. As if strength is the absence of need. As if to fall apart is to betray the person they thought you were. So you retreat further, and the cycle continues. Cognitive dissonance kicks in. You begin to feel ashamed not just for struggling, but for not struggling the right way. You compare your breakdown to someone else's breakthrough. You judge yourself for not being resilient, for not bouncing back faster, for not being grateful enough. Even healing becomes performative. You start journaling not to express, but to fix. You meditate not to feel, but to quiet your symptoms. You self-soothe with the pressure to be whole. It's an endless loop. You try to get better, only to feel worse for not improving fast enough. You try to stay strong, only to feel weaker for pretending. You feel like a failure for being human. But here's the deeper truth. The myth of having it all together is not just a personal lie. It's a cultural delusion. It's a system of control that keeps people striving, comparing, consuming, always searching for the next piece that will finally make them complete. It thrives on insecurity. It profits from inadequacy. It survives by convincing you that peace is one purchase, one milestone, one life hack away. But wholeness is not found through achievement. It is found through honesty. And honesty begins with saying, I don't have it all together, and I'm not supposed to. That moment, that confession is where the rebellion begins. Because the moment you stop pretending is the moment you start living. It begins in silence. Not the silence of repression, but the silence that comes when you stop performing. When you sit in the stillness and finally ask yourself, who am I when I'm not trying to be impressive? This is the quiet rebellion. Not dramatic, not aesthetic, not something you can post about, but something raw, tender, and completely unmarketable. You start by choosing honesty over image. You say, "I don't know," when everyone else claims certainty. You say, "I'm tired," when everyone else brags about hustling. You say, "I'm hurting," when everyone expects you to be inspirational. At first, it feels like failure, like you're disappointing people, like you're dismantling the very identity you've built your life upon. But this is what rebellion looks like. When the enemy is a myth you've internalized, you are not failing, you are waking up. Carl Jung once wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." And this is the paradox of liberation. To become whole, you must first embrace your fragmentation, the pieces you hide, the shame, the rage, the confusion, are not barriers to healing. They are the way through. You don't need to overcome your mess, you need to meet it. And you don't meet it with productivity hacks or affirmations. You meet it with presence, with radical self-inquiry, with the courage to feel without fixing. You begin to notice the voices inside you, the one that says, "You should be over this by now," the one that says, "Don't let them see you weak," the one that says, "Hold it together or they'll leave." You listen not to obey, but to understand where those voices come from. Whose approval are you still chasing? What standards are you trying to meet? Whose silence taught you that emotions are a liability? This is not a surface-level healing. This is shadow work. This is inner excavation, because what you're breaking free from is not just a mindset, it's a legacy of inherited expectations. Jean-Paul Sartre warned that we are condemned to be free. That is, we must bear the weight of creating meaning in a world that offers none by default. To rebel against the myth of having it all together is not simply to reject perfection, it is to take full ownership of your existence. You stop outsourcing your worth to institutions, titles, followers, or family roles. You stop waiting for external validation to give you permission to be real. You become responsible not for looking healed, but for living truthfully. And this rebellion doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it looks like cancelling a meeting to cry in peace. Sometimes it looks like walking away from a career that fed your ego but starved your soul. Sometimes it looks like admitting you don't know who you are anymore, and starting again, it will feel terrifying. And that's good, because terror is a sign that the mask is coming off. Aldous Huxley once said, "The truth that makes men free is for the most part the truth which men prefer not to hear." And here is that truth. No one has it all together. No one, not your mentor, not your therapist, not your favorite author, or the influencer with the morning routine, or the CEO who meditates daily and journals nightly. They're just better at hiding their fractures. Or they've curated a version of themselves that looks whole from a distance, but up close, they're like you, beautifully unfinished, aching, contradictory, trying. This is not meant to disillusion you, it's meant to free you, because once you stop idolizing togetherness, you start building something more meaningful, integrity, and integrity doesn't mean you're always aligned. It means you're aware of when you're not, and you're willing to return to yourself over and over again. The rebellion deepens when you redefine success. Success is no longer how well you maintain the illusion. It becomes how fully you can show up as yourself even when that self is grieving, confused, angry, or lost. It becomes how many masks you're willing to burn, how many roles you're willing to surrender, how many truths you're willing to say aloud. It becomes the quality of your questions, not the certainty of your answers. It becomes the depth of your relationships, not the size of your audience. It becomes the ability to sit in discomfort without abandoning yourself. This is real power, Not control over life, but connection to it. You begin to surround yourself with people who welcome your mess, people who ask, "What are you really feeling?" and then wait for the answer. You form relationships based on truth, not compatibility. You build community not around shared aesthetics, but shared courage. You let go of people who only loved you for the version of you that smiled all the time. You choose depth over performance, and in doing so, you allow others to do the same. Your rebellion becomes contagious. You speak your truth, and others feel less alone. You fall apart in public, and others realize they're allowed to, too. You model imperfection, and suddenly, healing becomes a communal act, not a personal project. This is how change happens, not through mass movements, but through small acts of personal revolution. Every time you say, "I don't have it all figured out," you crack the myth a little more. Every time you say, "I need help," you reclaim your humanity. Every time you admit you're not okay and don't rush to fix it, you give others permission to do the same. And slowly the culture begins to shift, from perfection to presence, from performance to intimacy, from self-optimization to self-acceptance. You don't escape the myth overnight, but you live outside it, one honest moment at a time. There comes a moment quiet, uncelebrated, unbroadcast, when the final mask falls. Not because you ripped it off in defiance, but because it simply dissolved. It no longer made sense to wear it, not in this light, not after everything. You're standing in the ruins of who you thought you needed to be, and instead of panic, there's a strange, sacred stillness. You don't feel broken. You feel bare, not weak, real, not lost. Finally, here. This is the moment you've spent your whole life, unknowingly, running from running toward. The realization you were never supposed to have it all together. Because that phrase was never rooted in truth. It was rooted in control, in shame, in the terror of being exposed. But life doesn't want your control. It wants your surrender. You see now that togetherness was always a mirage, something you chased to feel safe, to be loved, to prove you were enough. But what if you were already enough before the striving, before the trophies, before the curated smiles and strategic vulnerability? What if you never had to earn your belonging? This is the ultimate truth. Wholeness was never about being complete. It was about being fully present with your incompleteness. To be whole is not to be finished, is to include everything. The ache, the joy, the confusion, the relapse, the clarity, the forgetting, the remembering. Wholeness is not about perfection. It is about integration. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "You must still have chaos in yourself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." And for so long, you tried to kill the chaos, to sanitize it, medicate it, optimize it, perform over it, but the chaos was never your enemy. It was your soil. It was the fertile ground where your authenticity could root, where your art could bloom, where your soul could speak in its native tongue. The parts you tried to hide, they're not liabilities. They're your most honest poetry. You were never meant to be clean-cut and polished. You were meant to be wild, and cracked open and luminous with contradiction. You're not a statue. You're a story. And stories aren't neat, they are raw, cyclical, unresolved, alive. This is where your relationship to suffering changes. Pain no longer feels like evidence that you're failing. It feels like evidence that you're awake. You realize that every breakdown was a breakthrough in disguise, that every time life shattered your image of yourself, it was offering you something far more sacred, truth, and truth isn't tidy. It's not always beautiful, but it's real, and realness is what finally sets you free. You don't have to pretend anymore, not to your family, not to your followers, not to your inner critic. You are allowed to be messy and still be worthy. You are allowed to be uncertain and still be wise. You are allowed to be in pieces and still be holy. Think of a tree struck by lightning. At first, it seems ruined, burned, splintered, scarred. But give it time and something beautiful happens. It keeps growing, not in spite of the wound, but through it. The break becomes part of its shape. The scar becomes part of its story. And no one says that tree is failing for being imperfect. It is glorious in its survival. It is beautiful because it bears the mark of what it endured. What if you saw yourself that way? Not as damaged, not as behind, but as weathered and widening, and wildly alive. There is no finish line to reach, no version of you that will finally be together enough to earn rest or self-love. You don't need to wait until you've healed to start living. You don't need to wait until you've figured everything out to feel peace. You don't need to wait until the world understands you to feel whole. You can choose to come home to yourself now. You can choose to let go of the story that says you must perform to belong. You can choose to believe this one radical thing: you are already whole, not because you're complete, but because you contain everything. And from this truth, your life begins to change. Not outwardly, perhaps, not in ways the world might recognize, but inwardly there's a shift, a softening, a strength that no longer looks like armor but like openness. You become less interested in appearing put together and more interested in being real. You start listening to your body, your intuition, your needs, not because they're always right, but because they've always been yours. You begin to trust your own rhythm, your own becoming. You learn to honor your slow days, your aching mornings, your anxious nights. You stop measuring your life in productivity and start measuring it in presence. And when others look at you, they may not say they have it all together. They may say something better. They're honest, they're grounded, they're free. In the end, it turns out the only thing you ever truly needed was permission. Permission to be as you are, not fixed, not polished, but true. And maybe the most rebellious, revolutionary act in a world obsessed with control, perfection, and productivity is simply to be that person, to wake up each morning not asking, how can I hold it all together today, but how can I be here fully as I am? That's the quiet revolution. That's the unshakable power. That's the life no myth can touch. Because once you realize you don't need to have it all together, you finally start to feel whole.